I'm, I'm really grateful to be up here this morning. We've had a lot of men. We're blessed. We have a fairly small group that's starting out here, but we have a lot of very talented people, our Bible class teachers and our people that have been giving lessons, and I've benefited greatly from all of them. And I appreciate the ability that I have to stand up. And just to let you know, well, first of all, I want to thank my IT department, Neil, for helping us get this up on the screen, and my wife, who there might be a typo or two, but there would have been a lot more if she hadn't have read through my sermon for me. So I want to thank them as we get into this. My motivation for what I'm going to talk about today stems from a couple things. One is when we started our new work here, one of the obstacles I knew that we were going to have to overcome is that one of the pluses is that we're a tight-knit group and we know each other pretty well. But one of the limitations of that is that our sphere of influence is fairly small. We know each other, we have lunch together, we know each other really well. And a lot of the places that we came from, it was a lot more diverse group that we had better opportunities to maybe meet the local area, meet friends and family that maybe we have. So that's something coming into this that I knew, me personally, I was gonna have to try to get better at, is meeting my friends and my neighbors and my coworkers and inviting them to come worship with us. So that's one of my motivations for what I'm going to talk about today. And the other one is, I don't know about you all, but I wake up every morning, and if I can go to bed that night and I haven't needed help from anybody else, it's been a good day for me. I don't like to have to ask anybody for anything, and I try to live my life so that I don't have to do that. But what I'm going to talk about today, I think you'll see that that's not always an achievable goal for us. So we're going to be talking about the Good Samaritan, and it's a story that I think most of us are very, very familiar with, but I'm going to be approaching it from a little different direction. I think you'll see. And there's a method to my madness here. I'm going to spend a few minutes going through the scenario, but I think you'll understand why. The setting was July 4th weekend of this past year. It was a beautiful sunny day. It was mid-90s. My buddy had asked me to ride across town for him to test ride a motorcycle. He lived an hour the other direction, so it was much easier for me to go test drive it, and I wanted to do it anyway. So I was going to ride across town and test drive a motorcycle for him. I've ridden over 300,000 miles on motorcycles with only one small incident. I knew the route that I would be taking very well. I'd been to the dealership where I was going to be going numerous times. I had just had new tires and brakes put on my bike, and they had checked the whole bike over. What could possibly go wrong? And then the factors. My company had just spun off into a new company. And on the Friday before 4th of July weekend, my phone, which is also my business phone, they completely wiped it out. And in doing so, I lost all my phone numbers. I lost my insurance information. Think about if somebody wiped out your phone and everything that's on your phone, what you'd lose. I lost my get out of jail free card, which is American Motorcycle Association. I had a 1-800 number. I could have called them to help me. I do not carry any of that stuff anymore, the hard copies, because I had it all on my phone. I could not even read the screen on my phone due to how bright the sun was. So here I am stranded on the side of the road, which I'll tell you why in just a second, and I couldn't even read my phone, which even if I could, didn't have any of my information in it anyway. My family was all out of town this 4th of July weekend. Everyone I knew was gone. My friend, Keith Kane, the one person I did know, does not check his phone very often. So he called me the next day. I had called him and he called me the next day, which doesn't help. I did not bother to bring the following because it was just a quick 25-minute ride across town. I didn't bring any food or water. I didn't even bring a hat. I didn't bring sunscreen. I had nothing with me. So that's the scenario that I'm in. What had happened was I was riding from I-70 to 695, which is an extremely busy road. And I was in the fast lane on 695. I just merged. I was traveling at a high rate of speed. We'll call it the speed limit. Nobody would let me get over when my front tire, the front wheel bearings exploded on my bike. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was literally about to come off my bike. And I didn't know, all I knew was making this loud noise, and it was bucking and bronking like crazy, and I was going at a high rate of speed. I was in big trouble. Nobody would let me get over. So I'm sitting there going high speed on a 1,000-pound bike, and I couldn't even get over. And I finally got it over to a safe place and limped my way back around to the beginning of I-70. And that's I couldn't roll it any farther. That's where I had to stop. And that's the picture you see right there at the bottom. To speed the story up a little bit, I sat there for over 4 hours. I got really sunburned. I was dehydrated. An emergency vehicle finally stopped after about 3 hours and 45 minutes, and he didn't even have any water that he could give me. He said, that would be a good idea if we carried that, but they don't. 2 different tow trucks canceled picking me up because they decided that my AMA coverage, they would never get paid for it, so they didn't even tell me. I waited an hour, and they had canceled and didn't even tell me. 2 nice people did stop. An old lady in an older car stopped, and she goes, I don't think I could help you in any way, but I'm willing to try. Is there something I can do for you? And by that time, I already had some help on his way. And an older black gentleman in a beat up truck stopped, and he goes, can I help you? I said, I really appreciate that, but I have some help coming. And the ironic thing was, there was probably 1,000 cars that passed me. And those are the only 2 people that even stopped to see if I needed any help. My dealership calls what happened to me the incident, is what they call it. The top part is the bearings. They're supposed to be full of bearings. That wheel's supposed to roll. They said that if I was a cat and I had 9 lives, I used one of them up that day. This had never happened. Every dealership in the country now will not let a Indian motorcycle go out of their service department without checking this wheel bearing, because it's that dangerous. And they said, and they strongly recommend every time you change your tires now, you change these wheel bearings. But I've said all that to say this. When I started off that day, there's no scenario I could have possibly imagined that would have had me wind up on the side of that road with no resources, just burning up. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. And I think about this, and I think about my life, and I think about how I try to live my life so that doesn't happen, and yet I was a victim here. And I think as we get to the Good Samaritan, you're going to see that what's happened to me in this example, from living through it and coming out on the other side, I have more empathy now for people that I see. In the past, I'll get into this, but you think, well, what did they do wrong? Or why didn't they think to do this? And I think you can see in all of our lives where some of this stuff could happen to us, and we can be the victim at some point, even though you do your very best not to be. And I think that's important and meaningful to me. One other quick example, Southwest Airlines. I went to my parents' house a couple weeks ago. I booked a flight on Southwest. I have the highest seniority you can have with them. If anything goes wrong, I was perfectly confident that they would fix it and put me on the next flight. Well, 16,000 flights over 4 days were canceled by them. They wouldn't even answer your phone call. You were on your own out there. And their phone system didn't work. And even if I finally, after 4 days, you could at least get onto their website, but yet you couldn't book a flight for 2 weeks out. And even if you did, could you trust them anymore after I'd had 2 flights canceled? No, you couldn't. I was once again a victim, and never in my wildest dreams, all my travels, would I have ever imagined I could have wound up in that position. And I was lucky. I've heard of a couple people. One man lost out. He needed a heart transplant, and he lost out on the opportunity because they canceled 2 of his flights, and he couldn't even get a flight to go there. And a man and a wife on their honeymoon lost their $4,000 cruise, and they still don't have their luggage because of what Southwest did to them. These are all victims that didn't set out to be, didn't want to be, and yet they found themselves in that position. Well, why did I share these stories with you? I'll answer those questions now. for us. Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 25. And behold, a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said, What is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answered, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But he, desiring to justify himself, this being the lawyer, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? So that's what my primary focus was. The first one is that we can all be victims. The second part that I'm going to spend the rest of my time is who is our neighbor? And it's going to be defined for us. Jesus defines it for us. And it's important for us to have the empathy and to understand who our neighbor is and maybe what we can do for them. So we are now going to get in. I'm going to bounce back and forth between the story, but I'm going to quickly read the story of the Good Samaritan. And there's components of it that we're going to talk about in depth. But it says, But he, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him pass by on the other side, and so likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion, and went down to him and bound up his wounds, poured on him oil and wine, set him on his own animal, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii, and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend I will repay you when I come back. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, You go and do thou likewise. First of all, I want us to think about for a second from that last point, the one who showed him mercy. Well, just a quick definition of what mercy is. It's kind or forgiving treatment of someone who could be treated harshly. It's kindness or help given to people who are in a very bad or desperate situation. These are people that you might not even like. You might hate them, as a matter of fact, but you still have the opportunity to help them. And we'll see that in just a second. But from a couple quick points I want to bring out from the very point, and Wayne's talked about this a lot in our Bible classes, that words have meaning. And from verse 30, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's not just a word that was thrown in there. He was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And from the notes I've learned from what that trip was like, it dropped significantly in 18 miles, 2,500 feet or so from top to bottom. It was real rocky. And I have a quote from Martin Luther King. Him and his wife had gone there in that area. And a quote he had said, I can see why Jesus used this as a setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 feet above, and it drops significantly below. So it's a very precarious trip, and there's robbers that would wait there for people traveling. And we'll see in these examples that the man who got robbed was by himself, and the 3 people we're talking about were by themselves as well. Think about in your own mind, if you want to put it in perspective, think about the most dangerous places you feel like you could travel by yourself. I think about downtown Baltimore. I think about Eastern Kentucky. Deb and I lived there in Eastern Kentucky. And when one of the older members who was a sheriff found out where I had to travel, he said, never go by yourself. I said, well, I have to go by myself. It's my job. He goes, well, always carry a gun with you, because he felt like it was that dangerous. But we all could fill in that blank on the most dangerous places we'd have to travel. That's what this was like, where he was at. So let's get in quickly to the 3 main characters here. The first one is the priest. And now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. There's a couple of mindsets on why he would have done that. One of them is that priests, he was coming down from Jerusalem. Maybe he had just been working there for his 2 weeks commitment that he had to in there, or it's possible that he was just on his way to Jerusalem to do whatever, to preach a sermon, or there could be numerous reasons why he was on his way to Jericho. But the key point to make out is, and it's also, priests were not supposed to come in contact with dead bodies. It's possible that he thought he was either dead or very close to it and didn't want to be defiled by coming in contact with a dead body. So there was reasons potentially why he would have just gone by their side. Maybe he was so busy thinking about his next thing he had to do, he just glanced, he didn't even know the person, he didn't even notice the person and just walked by. And the same thing with the Levite. The Levite, as we know, are Jewish males who claim, this isn't my word, but patrilineal, the male, it's passed down from the male side of the family, patriarch. He was a descendant of the tribe of Levi, is who the Levites are. And just to paraphrase, he was a religious person who should have known better, who should have acted differently. And another thing to point out here is the Levite wasn't necessarily going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It doesn't say that. It just says he was traveling and walked by the person, which I think is interesting. So both of those people, the Levite and the priest, maybe they were doing nothing wrong, but it's important to note that Jesus pointed them out as not doing the right thing here. And they could have had their own excuses. They could have felt like, well, we're the chosen people. We don't have to help. They hated the Samaritans. That's a stated fact. They wanted nothing to do with Samaritans. The situation was dangerous. They knew it was dangerous already. It would have been even more dangerous by stopping to help somebody along the way. And they had other planned activities they had to get to. Very few of us, if you ask, well, what are you doing this afternoon? I got nothing to do. I'm wide open. I can help somebody today. Where it's always going to be inconvenient for us. And they could have said, well, I don't have enough money to help this person. So all these things could have been going through their mind on why they didn't help. But it's just important to note that they should have had compassion and mercy, the priest and the Levite, and they didn't. So let's talk quickly about the Samaritan. What do we know about them? There we go. A couple verses that will refresh our memory on who they were. Luke chapter 10. So you also, when you have done everything you were told to do, should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And when he was going to a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go, show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus answered, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. So they were considered foreigners, and yet here's a great example of the Samaritan doing the right thing, being thankful enough, and came back and thanked God. One other one, John chapter 4, verse 4 through 10. Now he'd gone through Samaria, and when he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, I'm going to butcher that. Near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon when a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. So this is the scenario we're in with these two groups of people. And just quickly, I want to just focus on what the Samaritan did for this man. When he saw him, he had compassion first and foremost. He saw him, he recognized him as a neighbor, and he was willing to help. He went to him and bound up his wounds. Think about that. Do you think anybody carries around bandages just to help somebody else? More than likely, he tore his clothes apart, or older clothes, or blankets, whatever he had to do to make bandages to help this person. He did something. He inconvenienced himself, if you will. He poured oil and wine. He wanted to help comfort the man and maybe get rid of infections and stuff, but he used those to help the man. He set him on his own animal. Think about it. Somebody that's near death, that's bleeding, probably dirty. How would you even get him up on an animal? That would have been difficult. He would have had to carry him more than the guy doing it himself. That would have been hard. It would not have been easy. It would not have been convenient. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. So he was going out of his way to help this person. And he said to the innkeeper, he took out 2 denarii, which one is the equivalent of 2 days' wages. So it's a significant amount of money he gave the innkeeper. And he said, take care of him, and whatever you spend, I will repay you when I come back. So what I take from that, I think it's what Christ in the parable is telling us, is no matter how generous you think you are, it's not enough. You can't be more generous than God is. Do you think he made the man who he was helping, do you think he made a deal with him? Well, I'm going to pay this, but I expect you to pay me back when I come back through. I don't think so. I think he saw a need. He went out of his way to take care of this man, and even when he had to go on his travels, he made compensation so that the innkeeper would help this man. And the question that's asked is, which of the three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? Quickly, some of the excuses that the Samaritan could have used, and we're all good at making up excuses when we want to, but he got the man that got ambushed, he got into his own troubles. It's his fault that he's in the position he's in. He should have anticipated the armed robbers and had his own protection. Another one is, he's not related to me. I don't need to help him. It's not my responsibility. And he hates me is another one. I'm a Samaritan then. If he's Jewish, he hates me. But none of those things hold water as far as God's concerned, as far as Christ is concerned in this parable. A couple other verses I want us to consider is 1 John chapter 4, verse 7. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. It's a love that we have as Christians that the world can't possibly have. It's a love that only comes from God. Our capacity to help our neighbors, to help our family, to help our enemies, our ability to do that comes from our love that God showed us and the love that we have for God. That's the only way that we can do it. From Leviticus 19:18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And as we could see when the lawyer was talking about his responsibilities, it's to love the Lord your God and then to love your neighbor. It was almost a throw-in. Oh yeah, and we got to love our neighbor. But yet when you look at the ramifications of what that is, you can't be pleasing to God without having this component in your life. Things for us to remember. We can all find ourselves as a victim. I think I've showed you where I've done it twice in the last 6 months. We can all find many excuses for not helping other people. We can all be the lawyer and look for the loopholes in our duties and responsibilities. We can all do what God expects us to do and help our neighbors. When others need our help, I found this quote, when others need our help the most, like the man beaten in the story of the Good Samaritan, our love for our neighbors is truly tested. Helping others is oftentimes not convenient, but might be the perfect time to impact someone's life and to be a great Christian example. No more, one quick example, I was little. I don't know if it comes up later. If it does, I'll skip it then. But my dad and I were driving in Chicago. I was 12 years old. He was on a business trip. He had taken me. And we got stranded in front of Comiskey Park in Chicago. That's the south side of Chicago. It's extremely dangerous. Our tire blew out. It was 11 o'clock at night. And we're sitting there wondering what we're going to do. This is a rental car. We didn't even think we had a spare tire. And this truck came up behind us with his bright lights on. And we're outside of our car, and you could hear gunshots and people screaming and everything. This was a extremely dangerous spot. And this father and son got out of their car and came up, and they said, "Let us help you. If we don't, you might not get out of here." And when they finished changing our tire for us, helping us get out, we tried to pay them. My dad did. And they said, "No, if you ever find anyone else in this position, you help them like we've helped you." And my point here is that 45 years later, I still remember that father and his son and what they did for us. And if you find people that you can help and you can relay it back, and they just told us to pass it forward basically, but if you're doing it because of your love for God and what He's done for us, and you share that, that's what the people you're helping is going to remember. And it's a great opportunity that we have to reach our neighbors, as I spoke about earlier, one of my motivations for this. God loved us enough to give His only Son. He did something for us. Christ loved us enough to die for us. He did something for us. It's not enough to see the need. The priest and the Levite, they both saw the need, but they didn't do anything about it. What you do is dependent on what you see. The priest and Levite walked by. The Samaritan saw a person in need. We have to be humble enough. We have to have the motivation every day when we wake up. We're Christians. We have to look for the opportunities. And what you see is what you are. The neighbor is a Samaritan because he saw a neighbor and helped. What do we see? Do we see the opportunities? And there's what I was going to talk about. So as I wrap up here today, who is our neighbor? That's a question you always have to ask yourself. And will we recognize the opportunities that we see? And are we willing to do something about it? Are we willing to go the extra step? Are we willing to get out of our comfort zone? Are we willing to not let excuses get in our way? Are we willing to live up to the standard that Jesus gave us in the parable of the Good Samaritan? So if you're here this morning and you haven't been baptized for your remission of your sins, you have that opportunity. And for those of us that are Christians, hopefully I've left us with something a week from now, 2 weeks from now, you'll think back on this, or when you see opportunities, hopefully you'll think back to the Samaritan and think about what our opportunities are. So please come forward as we stand and sing.